episode of Weekly Dialogue by Vietnam Investment Review. Today we're going to talk about digital transformation and digital talent in the banking industry of Vietnam. To provide some context, digital transformation is a national strategy of Vietnam specified in a document of the 13th National Party Congress and outlined in the National Digital Transformation Program to 2025 with orientation to 2030 approved by the Prime Minister. The strategy requires that digital transformation be applied in all economic sectors and localities. As for the banking industry, the State Bank of Vietnam has submitted to the government a number of plans and documents to promote digital transformation in banking activities, creating a legal basis for commercial banks to invest heavily in technology and online services to attract more customers. Over the past 2 years, many banks have digitized their data based on cloud technology, launched new digital banking services, enhanced security, and automated credit card approval process. That said, this entire information is still at a very early stage, and there are still many challenges to overcome. The most prominent of which is the requirement for tech personnel for this very important financial sector. So, to get more insights into this complicated process and learn about the industry best practices and achievements so far, we are very honored to invite today to our studio Mr. Jens Lottner, CEO of Techcombank. Thank you, Mr. Lottner, for taking the time to be here with us
Thanks
today.
for having me. Thank you.
For those who are new to the banking industry in Vietnam, Mr. Lottner has 28 years of experience in the financial sector at some of the world's leading institutions, including McKinsey and BCG, and he spent 2/3 of his time in Asia. Prior to Techcombank, he was the group CEO of Siam Commercial Bank in Thailand, where he led a very expansive digital transformation program, including the implementation of a mobile banking platform, the structuring of a new business model for key customer segments, the establishment of an analytic platform, and a cloud data warehouse. So once again, thank you so much for coming out to our studio. How are you today?
I'm very good. I'm very good.
All right, so at the intro section just now, I've given a very brief overview of your profile and experience, but would you be willing to elaborate a little on your career path and what caused your decision to come to Vietnam and specifically Techcombank?
Sure. And probably it's a question I have to ask myself on a regular basis. I think ultimately what I really enjoy is actually transformation. I really don't like so much repetitive work, and I think as a consultant that's what you're doing, right? You're basically paid for getting in and solving relatively big questions which otherwise might be relatively hard to get resolved. And even that Siam Commercial Bank as an executive, right? I did a lot of the transformation work and really changed operating model, business models. And then when the call came actually from Techcombank, you don't need to think so much about it, because on the one hand I think Vietnam is probably one of the most exciting places to be at this point in time, right? There's a lot of stuff happening, it's a lot of growth, very contrary to a lot of the other parts of the world. And then you have a platform like Techcombank, right, which is very aspirational. The board really wants to go places, and then being asked to head that transformation in that market, I think that's probably really a unique opportunity. So as I said, it was relatively easy for me to just say yes.
That's wonderful. So in your last 2 years in Vietnam, how do you assess the current state of digital transformation in general and in the banking industry where you work, and how does it compare to the rest of Southeast Asia?
So I think that's a good question, and I think if you compare a little bit the world, right? I think some of the changes which we've seen in places like Europe or US, right? It took 20 years to really take full steam, right? So probably the first development of platforms and all of this really goes back to 2000, right? And then I think as things are going into Asia, and Asia really started digitizing, these journeys became much faster, because the adoption of technology, because it actually is now all based on mobiles, right, made it really ubiquitous. So I think Thailand, when I was in Thailand, it basically, what I saw happening was probably over 20 years was probably happening in 3, 4, 5 years, right? And now my feeling is actually the same happens in Vietnam, but it actually happens in 2 years, right? Because I think customers are very ready. And then due to COVID, you saw a lot of behaviors which people would probably not have assumed to be imaginable beforehand, right? They basically just start doing it, right? They use it for ordering, they use it for doing banking services. So I think customers have moved very, very quickly. I don't think there's such a big difference right now in terms of behaviors, what you see here to Thailand or to Singapore, right? Is the banking industry there or other parts of the industry? Probably not to that extent yet, right? Because while customers are probably clear what they want, the ability to deliver is probably still different because you need to put a couple of things in place, technology, even legislation, regulation and all of this. So from that perspective, I would say we're probably somewhere 3 to 5 years behind as an industry to deliver on what has been delivered and surrounding us. But again, from a readiness on a customer perspective, I think we are probably pretty close. So that creates a lot of tension also for the banking industry to really start stepping up and delivering what the customer wants.
So since you mentioned the banking industry capability to meet customer demands in terms of digital needs, there are several models, approaches for digital transformation in the banking industry, but not all of them are efficient, right? And if they're not efficient, then they'll be eliminated. So what path is Techcombank taking and why?
So again, I think we probably had to take a couple of decisions on the way, right? So one big call usually banks are making is, are we transforming the whole bank or are we putting some of our digital activities into a different entity? And so we're running a digital bank outside, right? And the main bank develops a little bit its own speed, right? So the logic would be that outside, it's a new culture, it's a new environment, you can set up the technology in a different way, so it's just faster. But the problem is that the big ship might actually start getting disconnected from what let's say the small speedboats are actually doing. And we decided actually we would go for the transformation of the big bank. So we would not do these small things and try in different other areas. And I think the reason is we're probably not big enough to afford some of these ventures, because as you said, a lot of them are not making money, right? And a lot of them are folded in the course of time. So we basically said, okay, we still probably are small enough, we still are nimble enough, we don't need that additional complexity. So let's start going with the big bank. So one big transformation office created for shifting the whole bank towards a new paradigm. I think the second axis, you can say, is it something which is more technology driven or more business driven, right? So some of the early transformation where the chief technology officer was saying, okay, let's do some new platforms, and I create this and I create that, and they're just putting it in. And then over time, people figured out what to do with it, right? And I think if you're doing it very business driven, you're really saying, so what are the customer problems? What do I try to solve? And then you build it backwards from there and saying, so what platforms do I need? What do I need to change? So I think we started very much really business driven. So we're really putting a lot of these things in place, but we really ask ultimately, what does the customer really want? So it's a very business driven exercise where all the initiatives will actually be led by the business units. We are not separating it out, but we are really saying that if you want to change the way how you interact with your customers, please do that. But then you're also in charge of developing these capabilities. So as I said, business driven, very much taking the entire bank with you. The challenge is, it's a question of speed, of course, right? And the other question is then, are people getting overstretched? Because you're saying, oh, I need to transform my business, but I also need to run my business. And therefore, the challenge of that one is that a lot of this might actually fail because it's too complex as an approach. But as I said, I think we are still relatively small, and I think as a team, we are relatively cohesive, and as a management team. So we thought we are actually able to take that risk, and so far it seems to be working actually quite okay.
Right. So step back into the bigger picture. What criteria do you base your decision on in terms of what approach to take? You mentioned the company size and then whether you're business or technology centric. So for Techcombank, can you elaborate a little on the bank's digital transformation journey? And also, since you mentioned there will be like a shift, right, in terms of the department, so you need like a new technology department. How do you imagine the bank's organizational structure to be changed once the journey is accomplished?
So, a lot of questions. Okay, let me try to go one by one, right? So the first one is, how did we decide it? I think was really a question of, we have set a certain budget, right? And saying, so over the next 5 years, we want to invest around $500 million in technology, right? What can this do? Can you do these kind of additional events? Can you do some of these experiments, or actually do you need to be pretty focused, right? And I think ultimately, well, it sounds like a big number. In comparison, that's actually relatively small, right? Because what we are doing on overall technology, let's say 500 million, if you take a bank like DBS, right, they would probably invest this per annum. And so therefore, we don't have the luxury. So for us, it was very much like, what can we afford? What do we do? And again, the complexity and the returns, the business case was just much more compelling. So we really was a very much business-driven decision. In terms of how we organized already, probably we have much more management team members than a lot of the other banks. And that's not in order to make our life complex, but we thought that's what we need to reflect in the organization structure. So we have, in terms of transformation, a transformation unit, a data unit, a digital office, and technology. And they're all working on different parts of the organization, but they're all at the level of top management. So, because sometimes if you have a structure where all these at the lower levels, the businesses might just overrule all the changes which you want to implement, right? And therefore, they're at the same level, so we have to have a lot of relatively strong debates of what we should do, but they're all at the same hierarchical level. And therefore, again, I think we're able to challenge this question on, is it technology, is it business? Because it always comes together in the debate and in the discussion. And it also allows us to find great talent, right? So we have really one of the best data people you can probably find in this part of the world. We have one digital person who actually was in charge of all the digital transformation at one of the largest banks in Singapore. So we bring these people in, and then they really try to come up with the best possible answer. So it's already at this top level a constant struggle between business and technology, and we find that to be creative solution, right? And again, it takes a little bit more work because more people need to be aligned, but I think it gives us the richness of perspectives, right? So therefore, again, I think pretty clear we can only afford one path, right? But then on that path, probably we need to strengthen especially the technology perspective, but also making sure that there's this constant dialogue with this business. And I think, again, we are far away from our objective, but at least I think we got probably on a pretty good journey up to now.
Sure. Also on the topic of organizational structure, you mentioned the top layer of management. How about the people who are actually like carrying out the digital transformation? Does that affect them at all?
So some of the people we actually needed to hire, right? Because I think when we started maybe 2 years back, we had maybe 450, 500 people in our IT department. Probably at the end of the year, we will have 1,300 or 1,400, right? We had maybe 100 people who were dealing with data. We might now have 200 people with on data. We had maybe 50 people working on digital. Now we have 200, 250 people. So we brought in a lot of people, and of course what they need to do is they need to organize themselves with the rest of the organization, right? Because you're not doing things in isolation. So what we're doing very much is we're working in multifunctional teams. We're bringing people in from the business, from technology, from legal, and saying, please solve it jointly, because one of you alone is actually not able to join that or solve that topic. So I think from an organizational structure, while we still have blocks like any traditional bank, we probably have around 1,000 people who are working really in these multifunctional projects. They are outside of the traditional organization. They work in, with all these buzzwords, in squads, in scrums, in agile constructs. And again, that's a way actually for us to accelerate.
In your sharing so far, you mentioned a number of challenges that we need to overcome in the journey. Say, for example, the speed, right? And make sure that people are not overstretched. So how has Techcombank overcome these barriers in digital transformation? And you also mentioned we're at the very early stage of the journey, right? Like only 2 to 4 years. So as we move forward, do you foresee any obstacles?
So I mean, on challenges, probably I can spend hours on the challenges and all what went wrong, right? So
but if you need to summarize,
if I need to be precise, so I think probably the biggest challenges is really to make the different parts of the organization coming together work together, right? Because sometimes really the objectives of one part of the bank is a little bit different from the other part, right? So I think making sure that at the same point we transform while we still perform, that's probably one big part, right? The second one is, as we start bringing people in, there's a lot of new blood with new ideas constantly coming in. So we right now have around 12,000, 13,000 people. We hired last year probably around 4,800 people, right? So there are 30% coming into an organization, and we need to integrate, right? We need to understand if we're doing something, how is it done and all of that. So this cultural formation, this ongoing formation of trying to find ways that people work together, I think is actually really a big challenge, right? And not just finding the right capabilities, but the pure amalgamation of these into one cohesive
so that was also a cultural fit.
That's right. And what is the culture, right? If you have 30% coming in on a constant basis, the culture also evolves, right? So you have some anchor points, but they all will bring their own perspectives on all of this. So I think that's probably the second big point. The third one is there's this constant trade-off: should you go slow or fast? Slow has, of course, the advantage of you're not making so much mistakes, right? But maybe the market, maybe competitors are outperforming you. If you go fast, then yes, you might be to market, but we might also be missing things, right? And so I think probably in the past we tried to be very, very fast, and maybe we were not able to run as fast, right? So therefore we made a couple of mistakes. Nothing what cannot be recouped, but it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes money, right? So I think managing that trade-off between rather being a little bit ahead, making failures, recognizing the failures, learn from these, and then get back up and start moving on. I think that's very hard to establish as a DNA, but to be fair, the whole bank has nothing to do with me or the management team. The whole bank for the last 30 years has been established on that DNA. So I think for us it's very easy to do these kind of things. Change is very much ingrained in our DNA, which I think is very different to some of the other banks around us who have 60 years, 100 years of history. I think it's much harder for them to change. So again, most of the challenges is probably around managing the right trade-off between when to go fast, when to go slow, and finding the right people and really get them to work together. And I think, as I said, we had our experiences. Sometimes we were too technology driven, sometimes we were too business driven. So I think it's still trying to get these balances right is probably the key area.
Yeah, I feel like that's the most difficult part of this journey, is that there's no specific formula, right? Like there's not one right way to go. So in your 2 years of experience, and maybe like a lot of years before that, when it comes to a decision to make, say for example, do we go fast or slow, right? Or how many people do we hire? Do you have this one thing where you base your decision on? say for example like a personal or a professional kind of like anchor?
So basically the default is rather faster than slower. I mean, it's more, to a certain extent, I think you can only try to analyze things up to a certain point in time, right? And at one point in time, you need to be aware that you need to make a decision under uncertainty, right? And that's actually what managers are paid for. If everything is clear, you can actually program the decision. You can have a robot, right? So my job description to a certain extent is create clarity and then saying, okay, now let's start moving this or the other way. I think the other one is pretty much 80-20, right? You get 80% of the result in 20% of the time, right? So therefore, artificial precision and all of that is actually not required. So therefore, that's what I'm saying. I think you're rather basically willing to take the punch, really start rather with a smaller investment and try to experiment. When it comes to the big decisions, I mean, so big decisions, $50 million, $100 million or something like that. I mean, that's when you probably want to be a little bit more precise, right? But I think when it comes to rather smaller pieces, I think my decision philosophy would just be, it's 80-20. If you're really not sure, don't commit too much. Basically go just in step, try to learn a little bit more. But there's only one scarce commodity in the world, and that is time. Because time, it's impossible to refill time. Everything else is, you can make up for it. Time, you can't.
It's very limited. Thank you very much for the insightful advice. So moving on to the second part of today's discussion is in terms of recruitment and talent, right? Last July, Techcombank organized an international talent recruitment campaign in Singapore and London. Can you share with us a little bit about the result of this program?
Let's start, why did we do it in the first place, right?
Yes.
So the logic was that, and it comes back to what we discussed beforehand, in the end it's about time, right? You want to be to market relatively quick. And Vietnam has a lot of very, very good talent. But some of the experience they have just not been able to make because nobody has done it so far, right? And in other markets, you can just go and saying, okay, let me hire a guy, I make it up from Techcombank or any other bank or any other company, and just basically saying, please come and help me. But if we are doing a lot of things which have not been done beforehand, then the only way to find these experiences is probably overseas. So what we're trying to find is people who have experiences, who have done and seen more, so that when we going through all the challenges we just described, should we go fast, should we go slow, we're basically saying, I've been there. So what I've seen is, that doesn't make sense, right? So we just hire these people to get better information and help us to lead the rest of the organization on a more productive way. So that was the intent. And so that's when we said, where do we find these people? So we basically choose in Singapore, we choose the UK, and we probably go to the US at the end of the year, and there are a couple of other countries we're looking at. On average, we had around 60 to 70 people attending the events in each country, and these were people, kind of mid-career people, right? So let's say 10, 15 years in the job, and across all different fields. And basically we extended out of this full group right now maybe 40 offers, and we hope that around 30 to 40 people will basically join us over the next couple of months. And again, for us it was actually quite a successful exercise, right? First one is, these are very, very talented people, but we were expecting probably a little bit more reluctance, that people were saying, what is this, right? So we were rather expecting, we seeded a certain interest, and then over the next 1-2 years, we would get people in, but I think there were much more willingness to basically saying, okay, let's really make this move right now. And so they really will help us now going forward on technology, data, some technical areas like risk, finance. So I would expect that over the next year or so, right, we would get maybe around 60, 80 people from that recruiting trip, and they will be adding as managers or experts who are really helping us with very technical questions.
Right. So going back to your clarification earlier, right? You said the reason that you did the campaign in the first place was because there are not enough people in the country who are capable of doing digital transformation so far. So that's why I have to like reach out to countries who are more who has more experience in this, right? But going back to the bigger picture, do you think this is an industry best practice to hire people from overseas, or is it just a solution to the current shortage of digital personnel who are both capable in finance and technology, right? Yeah. So.
Let me correct. I think again, if you're saying is are people capable of digital transformation or not? I think we have
experience. Yeah.
You see, because I think there are a lot of people who have a lot of experience in digital transformation, right? But the experiences you would get, right? There's nothing what you can do in order to replace that experience, right? There are only two ways what you could do. Either you hire consultants coming in and basically saying, I give you the experience, right? Or you allow people to make the mistakes and basically create the experiences over time, right? Second one is, if you have all the time in the world, that might actually be a better way, but we don't. Getting people in who are basically helping as a consultant and all of that, we saw during COVID, you try to rely on them, but they cannot fly, they cannot come, they cannot do this, and I think transformation is pretty much contact sport. Hence, I think this is one option to really go a third way, right? And saying, take these people in, bring them in-house, because I think ultimately we need that capability in-house. We cannot always outsource. And then just accelerate that learning experience, right? So therefore, I think it is part or a complementary part of our strategy. Would I do the same thing if I would be in Australia or something like that, right? Probably not. But if I would be in Australia and I'm the first one to try to do something which nobody else has done yet in Australia, I probably would need to do exactly the same.
Right.
Because what else do I want to do? So from that perspective, I think we will continue to do that. And again, the whole idea is to accelerate the learning experience from the people who are here. Because it's probably one of the most effective ways to really get them trained in these experiences which otherwise they wouldn't have.
So continue on that point. So in addition to overseas recruitment, how does Techcombank continuously attract domestic talent and conduct internal training?
We have 13,000 people. Probably 150 have this overseas experience. So vast majority are still the other guys.
Right.
So first one is how do we attract, right? I think we still try to describe what we are doing in a way that is exciting for people to join. A lot of talent is basically also not trying to do the same thing again and again, right? They're looking for transformation, they're looking for purpose, they're trying to identify something bigger than just themselves, right? And that's when we said change banking, change lives as a part of our vision. I think if you're a developer and you want to do things at scale, you can either join a startup or you can join a bank like Techcombank, right? But if our app goes to the market, it affects 5 million people, or going forward 10 million people. If you're a startup, that's some of their challenges. It takes a lot of time. So I think attraction is about, of course, remuneration and all of that, but I think it's about culture, it's about the story, it's about what you can achieve if you join us. Once you're there, then we know we still need to train. So we have invested a lot in online training platforms. So right now, I think last year on average, training per person was around 53 hours per year, right? So it would be, depends on how much hours you're working in a day, so it would be an equivalent of maybe a little bit more, 1.5 weeks. This year, up to August, we're already at 48 hours. And we are working a lot with partners we're bringing in together to enhance actually training. So we worked with AWS and basically saying, please help us certify our people on cloud engineering and cloud computing. So we had 1,800 people doing cloud computing. And we worked with partners to go even into the universities and start setting up new training programs. So there's a lot of different things we're trying to do. And then there's one element right now where we create a high-end training program for our top leaders to help them really on their journey for digital transformation. So we're working with some of the best executive MBA schools in the world to create a program in Vietnam just for our top people to actually help them accelerate on the journey. Not that they need to basically work for 10 or 15 years somewhere overseas, but can we do that within a year if we just bring the right people together? So we train across the entire organization because, as you're saying, this is just one element. Ultimately, we need to bring the whole organization to the next level.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that Techcombank will continue to recruit talents in other parts of the world, right? And even though it makes a lot of sense, right, as you mentioned, it is still a fairly new approach amongst domestic enterprise. So is this a step to maybe internationalize the banking operations and prepare to bring the bank to the international market?
To be very fair, it's not. I think what we're really trying to do is to help get this talent to build our operations in Vietnam, right? I think we're still far away, as I said in the beginning, we are 3 to 5 years behind probably what happens in other parts of the world. So I still think we need to really bring our house in order and really start working on our own capabilities. Once that is achieved, then we might actually look outside. But right now, everyone tries to get into Vietnam, right? Because it's such a high growth market, young population. So everyone tries to get in here. It's a little bit unclear why we would try to get out into markets which are maybe more competitive or where we don't have a competitive advantage or growth is much slower. So we're really just taking it as a way to diversify our staff base, but it's really not an intent to go international as long as we don't have the capabilities. And again, I think that will still take actually quite some time.
Right. So I guess that comes to my last question. So looking at the financial market at the moment, what advice would you give to other domestic financial institutions when it comes to investing in technology? Is international recruitment suitable for all financial institutions? Because there are still differences in corporate governance, right?
So I think it's a very interesting question. And again, I used to give professional advice for a living, but now I'm a little bit more reluctant. I think ultimately, if you want to bring these people in, I think, as you said, a lot of other elements need to change, right? You think about compensation, you need to think about fairness to local employees, because sometimes they're just on a very different compensation package. You need to make sure that you can assimilate these into the new culture, right? Because they have been outside for a bit. But probably the most important thing is, and that's what people looked at when we went overseas, right? They're saying is, do I get the same kind of international work experience I would be getting at a Citibank or as a Stanchart or something like that, right? That they don't know what it means to work in a local bank, right? And I think that's where we needed to do a lot of explanation to basically saying, how are we working? What are our models? What are the technologies we're working with? What the working styles, the culture, the operating models? And probably these looking much closer to what you would find in an international bank. And I think that gave them the comfort to basically saying, okay, fine, I was not aware that this exists, so I'm happy to take the plunge and come over. If other banks are doing exactly the same and having this openness, why would they not, right? If they are on the same journey and all of this. But again, I think it takes, probably you need to think it all the way through once you get these people in, right? And how they work with the rest of the game, right? Sometimes like a soccer analogy, right? If you really put a Premier League player into a new environment, right? Will the guy still shine? or what is the rest of the organization doing, the rest of the team doing. And that I think you need to really figure out. I think a lot of them were getting comfortable to join because they had seen other people beforehand. If you're the first 3 or 4 guys, I'm pretty sure people would not have taken the plunge. But given the fact that already we're working 50, 60 expats who are relatively able to communicate across the organization in English and all of that, I think makes it much, much easier. Long answer, but probably short summary. I think if there's a lot of benefit, if you have thought it all the way through, by all means, but I think it's really probably every single company's decision.
Right. I know that I already said that that was my last question, but I'm just a little curious. So for Techcombank, can you give an example of how you're integrating your new international hires into the company, and how do you address, like organizational culture in terms of, digital transformation in general, and international hire in digital transformation in particular?
A lot of the people we're hiring are within these transformation projects, right? So these thousands people, as I said, they're working very much in agile environments, and they're working with young, talented people who are probably coming a little bit from a different background. Language is much, much easier because the English skills and the capabilities are actually very different. And then they are forming teams really to create the right kind of culture. So we're working a lot on fostering our 5 core cultures across the organization. So there are events, there are competitions, we give a lot of money for outings, for kind of parties, and so just people to bond, not just being there and work, right? But actually also come together as a person. Then also when we do even hiring, we do tests in understanding how well they would probably adopt to a different environment, right? So we're not just interviewing and saying, oh, I feel this is a great guy. We really ask consultants to come in and basically do an assessment, holistic assessment. And we also turn down people where we believe they are not fitting into that environment, right? So we have therefore the raw material, which probably is already a little bit more open to these new environments. Some of the experiences, somebody who has never worked in Asia and has not somewhere kind of familiarity with Asia probably would not hire. The rejection usually doesn't work. So we check on that level, but then if we're putting them in, there's really a job of bringing them together, and the managers know that they need to form these teams. But then, as I said, if you have 4,800 people joining in a year, a lot of them are new, right? So you're not having that reaction, oh, I've been here for 50 years, right? Now, a lot of them are, oh, I'm here 3 months or you're 6 months, or so 3 years is already a long time. And bringing that together, there's an openness to that assimilation, and then again, we have some structured programs to make that work.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mr. Lottner, for coming on to our show today and for the very meaningful discussion so far. It was very inspiring to learn about your experience and how your global experience have shaped the digital transformation for Techcombank in particular, and for the country in general. We wish you a lot of health and luck and continue to lead Techcombank to success.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And that also wraps up this edition of Weekly Dialogue. Over the past hour, we have gone over the different opportunities and challenges in digital transformation in the banking industry in Vietnam, and discussed ways to attract and retain talents for the industry. Even though the picture was nowhere near complete, we hope that the information discussed was somewhat useful for our viewers, and somehow sparks new digital transformation ideas and initiatives moving forward. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next episode of Weekly Dialogue. Thank you and goodbye.